Greetings. It's Thursday, June the 5th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Midweek Report. Do you hear that? The world awaits for the other Russian shoe to drop, as the line in the sand that country drew some time ago has pretty much been crossed. The drone attack Ukraine launched on Russia last week may or may not have been as devastating as first reported, but that's not what's important. This is not about Ukraine being bold and clever. This was a NATO attack on Russia's nuclear delivery systems. And that's a big no-no. If an attack has been made on a nation's nuclear weapons infrastructure, and that's what those Russian bombers were a part of, well, we're now playing with nuclear weapons during an ongoing military conflict. And if you don't believe that, I have a bridge connecting Brooklyn to Manhattan I'd like to sell you. Oh, and speaking of bridges, the attack on the Russian-built bridge connecting their mainland to the Crimean Peninsula, that was rendered pretty much useless in that underwater bombing that occurred. And of course, there was no way the Ukrainians could have pulled that off by themselves. It was yet another military NATO hit against Russia, one that puts Russian troops in the Crimea at a disadvantage. Maybe not as much danger as people are saying, but it's certainly a very big inconvenience. That train bridge blown up in Russia last week at the time of the drone attack, apparently that was done with the intention of killing people riding on a passenger train. That's being labeled an act of terrorism, which it obviously was. It wasn't a coincidence. Somebody was waiting to set off the bomb when a train was crossing. One full of civilians. They hung a lot of people at Nuremberg for stuff like that, you know. At this point, Russia could be well beyond justified to retaliate, and not just against Ukraine, although that is very much expected. They have the moral justification to hit those supplying and helping those who are attacking their land and killing their people. And that means the European members of NATO and the United States. Now, a year ago, we were worried about a third world war brought on by the Biden administration. Now we're worried about the same thing with the Trump administration. The team we voted for to end the insanity, well, it's not happening. And worse, it looks like President Trump and his team didn't know about this thing ahead of time. And that is pretty scary. The deep state that so many of us have been ranting about for years is clearly in the driver's seat and steering the American ship of state more than you would have thought possible. For those of you who are rooting for Ukraine or think that passable country has any chance of winning this long, needless war, you are naive to the point of foolishness. This conflict has its roots at the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union back in 1991, and the decision at that time and by subsequent American administrations to kick the Russians when they were down, instead of honoring our time-honored tradition of building up those we had defeated in conflict, which is what happened after World War II. Well, we decided not to do that with the Russians for some reason, and the people who were young and in government at that time grew up still fighting the last war against a nation that no longer exists. They've been projecting that on Russia, and that's why we're here today and why we're at where we're at. There's plenty of blood on plenty of hands to go around with this war, and the United States has more than its share staining its palms. So the best thing is to end it and do everything possible to make that happen. Ukraine is arguably the most corrupt and criminally run European countries in recent history, and currently run by one of the most corrupt criminals in recent history. It and he are not worth the money that has been spent, the blood that has been spilt, or the lives that may still be lost, especially American ones, if this thing goes out of control to where it could possibly go. And that's World War III, that's missiles flying, that's mushroom clouds. That's actually more of a possibility than in recent decades. Ukraine is not worth going to war over, and certainly not worth dying over, be it the death of the individual or the death of the species. This war can be ended quickly if the U.S. and NATO stop supplying Zelensky with money and weapons and, by extraction, cocaine. That's all it takes. They're not worth it. And we are closer to the edge than the average American or the average American politician can comprehend. Oh, and Senators Graham of South Carolina and Blumenthal of Connecticut. $1 million spent on your trip to Ukraine to continue your warmongering? The hotel bill for Senator Graham was more than $400,000 for a couple of nights' stay. $400,000. Yes, you heard that right. The actual receipts being passed around. He approved himself, apparently. I wonder who's going to be paying for that. Not even drug-infused rock stars trashing hotel rooms back in the 1960s and 70s ran up that kind of a tab. I mean, these were back in the days when people were throwing TVs out of balcony windows and landing them in swimming pools, and are senators that far gone? What were you two guys up to there, really? Must have been one hell of a party or one hell of a kickback. Meanwhile, while we're in the threat to humanity department, President Trump's big, beautiful bill is a real Trojan horse. I mean, something designed to go in and do all sorts of mayhem. And there's a long list of things that you can talk about, wasted money and all sorts of fun things. But what I want to talk to you about is how AI will be utilized and regulated, or rather how it won't be regulated by the government if that becomes law. Now, in the interest of accuracy, let me read you directly from the current bill what is now being worked on, and this way it'll explain what they are up to. Okay, this is section 43201. Yes, these things are that big. It's interesting how when people have a hard time finishing 250 or 350-page books in a week or two, why they can expect to be made to read through legislation in legalese that's many thousands of pages long, but that's another argument. Let me read you this. First off, they're going to be authorizing the U.S. government to utilize AI. Underneath that section, Part B, authorized users, the Secretary of Commerce shall use the funds appropriated under subsection A for the following. 1. To replace or modernize within the Department of Commerce legacy business systems with state-of-the-art commercial artificial intelligence systems and automated decision systems. Yes, if I can say that, automated decision systems, it says quite clearly. Part 2. To facilitate within the Department of Commerce the adoption of artificial intelligence models that increase operational efficiency and service delivery. 3. To improve within the Department of Commerce the cybersecurity posture of federal information technology systems through modernized architecture, automated threat detection, and integrated artificial intelligence solutions. Integrated. So AI is going to be in charge of security. That's nice. Now, this is even more disturbing. Later on in the bill, it says, in general, except as provided in paragraph 2, no state or political subdivision thereof may enforce during the 10-year period beginning on the date of the enactment of this act any law or regulation of the state or a political subdivision thereof limiting, restricting, or otherwise regulating artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems entered into interstate commerce. In other words, there will be no regulations whatsoever on the development and implementation of artificial intelligence for 10 years after this thing becomes law. Now, think about that. What is going on here? This would explain why so many of the tech giants showed up to Donald Trump's inauguration, but again, the art of the deal. You want to give and take, and this is something that is being given and could end up taking an awful lot. The way I read this is artificial intelligence is going to run amok for 10 years. No regulation, and many states already have regulations governing AI, and that's all going to be null and void at the federal level. That's all going to be not enforceable. I'll just let your imagination go with that one because that's probably the best thing you can do right now. Whether or not this thing passes the Senate in this form, well, we don't really know, do we? We'll see how things go. Clearly, the deep state wants AI to be running things. I guess if you run out of science fiction novels, you'll be reading some science fact on this pretty soon. Speaking of computers and people who live within them, 2 men have just been arrested in connection with the May 17 bombing of a fertility clinic in California. That's the one where the bomber was killed in the attack. A car bomb was placed in front of or just behind a fertility clinic, a place where people go to have children who have difficulty, and went off and he was killed somehow. Exactly how he died has not been made clear, but it doesn't seem to have been at the hands of the police. 2 more people were involved with this guy, at least, maybe more. The perpetrators behind the incident, according to the FBI, met online and shared the common belief that humans should not reproduce and, I'm quoting, should not exist, quote unquote. So these 3 inhumans, anti-humans, whatever you want to call them, decided to do something about it. So they made a fertilizer bomb. Kind of what they used in 1995 in Oklahoma City, except at a much smaller scale, and no one was hurt or killed, fortunately, except the perpetrator. None of the embryos in storage were harmed either, according to the reports. Now just think about that. 3 young men decide that humanity should not reproduce. I take it they had a hard time getting dates on Saturday night, and that we shouldn't exist. I wonder what industry these guys were in. Well, it's close to Silicon Valley, but that hasn't come out yet. What's quite clear is they spent a lot of time online. And what's even more clear is they weren't better for it. We'll see what happens as the investigation and later the prosecution and trial will be made public. What is going on here, ladies and gentlemen? What is happening? Is there some sort of mind virus being spread online by way of online forums, computer games, which I suspect might be the case, or some other machine-centric activity that would cause this sort of thing to happen and people to have these sorts of non-thoughts, programmed attitudes? We call it clown world almost in jest, but it's real. It is real. I could talk for nearly an hour every day on the insanity going on in our nation. Everything from the transgender craziness to members of Congress who don't know how hamburgers are made. We are awash in insanity, and much of it is criminal insanity, and not just on the street. We see it at all levels of our society and our political system, and to what extent we're seeing it in the military, well, one can only guess. And we're seeing it in spite of the pushback. In spite of that pushback, it seems to be getting worse. The era of American craziness and insanity, which was not what built our country, but can clearly destroy it, it has to end, or it will end us. Oh, and anything new on investigating, arresting, or prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein's clients? The ones that we keep hearing about? You know, those rich and powerful types who flew on his private plane to a remote island in the Caribbean and did all sorts of unspeakable things to children? Anything? No, nothing. Yeah, I didn't think so. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies. Hope they become friends, and we need as many friends as we can get these days. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com, and I can be reached by private messaging. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World and the Deep State must be destroyed. Good day.